Welcome to the ATA podcast, where we talk to former elite athletes sharing their insights and wisdom derived from successfully transitioning into life beyond the game. A very warm welcome to the Athlete Transition Accelerator. We're delighted to be joined today by Jonny Kennedy, a former professional rugby union player, played internationally at age group level for Scotland, also played in the Premiership with Sale Sharks. Now, unfortunately, Jonny had to bring his career to a premature end and retire at the age of just 21. So, Jonny, first of all, very warm welcome and thank you for joining us today. Can you take us back to that particular moment and educate us on what actually transpired and what led to you having to retire at such a young age?
Yeah, thanks for having me, James and Carl. Pleasure to be here. I always dreamt of being a rugby player, and I I lived up to that dream somewhat with playing at England under 16s, 18s, and Scotland 20s, and playing at Sale Sharks. But what essentially happened was repetitive concussion. And at the time, the protocols were you get concussed, you take your cog test, which is you take a baseline cog test at the in the pre-season period, before every season, and when you take the cog test, you're compared against your baseline. So I had numerous. I think I had 3 or 4 repetitive on-field concussions at that time period across three games.
Right.
And I didn't tell anyone, but then it got picked up on footage. Typically you don't tell anyone when you get concussed because you're out of the game
You
for
just
4
don't
weeks.
do that. Yeah.
You don't do it.
Yeah.
So it got picked up in some footage, and I was training on the training paddock at Carrington at the time, and the lead physio came and picked me off and said, "Look, we've seen you've been concussed. Why don't you tell us you have to go and take a cog test?" I took a cog test, and I was massively behind. I think I was 50% behind my baseline cog test at the time, and then went on, did a load of more tests, got an MRI scan, got a scan on my neck, on my spine, on my brain. There was nothing wrong with it at the time, but the neurosurgeon said, "Look, you've had quite a few knocks, and it's clearly affected you. If you were my son, I would tell you to stop."
Right.
So at the time, I was left with the dilemma: do I stop or do I continue? My father, who was actually the owner of the club at the time, he said, "Look, you need to stop. You've got the family business to fall back on. You've got the brain's most important organ. You can't end up brain dead." So, against my own real will and against what I wanted to do, I begrudgingly and with a heavy heart stopped the game. And it ended up with a load of issues after that, mentally, but also with identity and what I do next. And that's even with me being so fortunate and blessed that I had something to fall back on. So, I recognize that, and a lot of rugby players and football players don't have anything else to fall back on. So it could be a lot more difficult in those circumstances.
Yeah, that's a hell of a story, and I think it's a brave story as well, because you actually, along with your father, took that decision to, I'm going to move away at 21. I've sort of reached where I wanted to get to. Maybe haven't reached the full goals that I set out to achieve, but I'm going to take the decision for my health to just move away. And just because you had something sitting there that you could go into certainly doesn't make it easy transition to move on. And one of the things that we always talk about with athletes, particularly around the transition, is what was the catalyst for your reason to move on. Yours is very clear. You got 3 repeated smacks in the head that meant you shouldn't really carry on playing a contact sport. And what would be really interested just to get an understanding is, and you hit upon it a little bit just then, is how difficult at such a young age was it to finally make that decision of, I'm going to have to end this and move on? And what were some of the steps you took to sort of ease that transition and make it as smooth as possible?
I think it's been very, very difficult, mainly because I've always found it very hard to talk about emotional and mental health side of things. And being honest with myself has been a very difficult thing for me. And it's only something that I've recently embraced. So I would cover it up, and I'll be honest, I covered it up at the time. I ended up turning to drink and other substances, and and covering it up as if, oh, this is a good life now, like not having to play rugby and stuff. And actually, what happened at the time, Carl, was I ended up meeting, it was serendipity, my wife at the time. And I took all my energy that I was putting into rugby into this new relationship that came along. And then because the timing was right, it was like that she ended up coming back with a family to the UK, but she lived in Australia at the time. So I was like, oh, brilliant! I can run away from this and go over to Australia and go and pursue this and see where it takes me. So I've actually found it really difficult, and I've spent the last, it's been 15 years of, I'd say 10 of the 15, 10 or 12 of the 15 years has been, um, you know, putting on a facade in reality. Because I could afford to do that. I could afford to do that. I had something to fall back on. I wasn't really being completely honest with myself. And I had something else to put my energy into. But the more you do that, the more it builds up. It's like a pressure cooker, and that pressure just keeps building, building, building before you're going to explode at some point. So
Well,
I find
I appreciate your candor, Johnny, and I think this issue of identity comes up a lot. I think what Carl and I take a huge amount of fulfillment from is we're speaking to athletes on a daily basis all around the world, different stages of the career, different levels, different profiles, but there's a unifying set of themes. And one of them that comes up time and again is that loss of identity. Yeah. And it doesn't matter whether you've had a 15-year career or a 2-year career, people build and channel everything into that identity. And when it stops, and particularly when it stops not on your terms, as it has done with you, it's absolutely natural to encounter problems, to encounter anxiety at the lower level and more severe mental health challenges at the more serious level. So I really appreciate your candor and expressing the fact that it's taken years, not months, to be able to work through that. So I suppose for the benefit of people that are listening, Johnny, and again, whatever you want to say or don't say, it's very much about accessing your wisdom here. How would you look back at that journey and help people that are possibly going to step into the same world? There are any number of athletes in any given season that unfortunately are given the terrible news you were. Might be different parts of the body. It might be knee injuries, neck injuries, shoulder injuries, but particularly in contact-based sports, they're told that's it, that's the end. Is there anything with the benefit of hindsight and the benefit of you saying being more open and more honest with yourself that you could say, do you know what, this helped, this is what I did, possibly should have done that earlier, because other people are going to wrestle with this identity challenge in the same way that you evidently have done?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, yes, there definitely. I think my mindset when I was 21 is very different to my mindset now.
Of course.
And it's having that growth mindset. I think if you live your life as a rugby player, this is how I always view it. Like as a sportsman or athlete or as a rugby player, a lot of things are within your control on the rugby paddock. Or the rugby field. So whether you make that tackle or not, usually you can make the decision whether you're going to make that tackle or not. It's usually up in your head. Mm-hmm. Or whether you make a good pass, it comes down to how much time you put into that pass. Or play is within your control in terms of how well you play and how well you build your brand, etc., etc. But there are things that are outside your control, such as concussions can happen. Someone's knee might just come in. You might go in as hard as you can in the tackle, but someone's knee might just change angle in the last split second. You didn't see it, and it can be taken away from you. So for me, I've struggled with the controllables and uncontrollables, and I think viewing as look, there's no certainty in life. There's no certainty in terms of what's going to happen to you and your future. Enjoy the moment because you never know where it's going to end. And secondly, don't view it as this is the end. Like this is the end of one chapter, but then the beginning of another. And I think having that perspective is really interesting. Is has been peaceful for me. It's given me a lot of peace.
And that's it's great wisdom. And again, we hear this a lot, Johnny, in terms of enjoy the moment. Because I think a lot of sportsmen and women, we've both been there. I remember it myself. You put so much pressure on yourself to perform that you almost take the fun out of it. It's all about
Yeah,
avoiding mistakes and assessing how many tackles did I make or miss, and embrace the moment is great advice. I think it always comes to the fore from people who have hung up the proverbial boots. They look back and go, oh, I wish I'd enjoyed it a little bit more. The controllables is another great tip that you're sharing because I think it translates into all walks of life. Things come at us that we can't control, and we can send ourselves almost mad with frustration trying to control the uncontrollables. But there are always things you can control.
yeah,
And I'm interested now, you very humbly said, look, I had something to fall back on. So I want to touch on that, but I also want to then understand the little bit of the entrepreneurial journey that evidently you have gone on with your wife, because a lot of players, particularly currently, men and women, different sports again, often mention to us, I'm excited to explore something entrepreneurial. I like the idea of working for myself. I like the idea of building something, but I'm not quite sure how to get started. So I think there's two chapters that from our research looking at your world of sort of stepping into the family business and
yeah.
also the sort of ventures that you developed with your wife. So could you talk a little bit, because obviously you did step into the controllables, one aspect personally, which is great advice. You invested heavily in a relationship that subsequently you became your wife in a marriage, so that was obviously time well spent. You stepped into the family business. Are you still in that? And tell us a bit about that and the role you do there, but also the entrepreneurial side of what you're building.
Yeah, so my dad has built an empire of businesses across different industries. So the first thing that I mean, I went to university after I hung my boots. So when I was in Australia with my wife, I went to university for a year,
Right.
studied business management, but that quickly got boring for me. So I moved back over to the UK, and the first business I got involved with was renewable energy. Was so it was building a wind farm up in Scotland in Fife, and I found that really interesting because it's something that was really new at the time.
Yep.
This was a good 14 years ago or so. It was doing something new within the family, so I felt like that was something that I could own. But ultimately, I just I didn't. It wasn't scratching the itch for me. It
Okay.
just wasn't. It was like it was quite a good job. It felt like we were achieving things, but it just wasn't. I don't know. I've always wanted to do to plow my own furrow in a way.
Yeah, no,
I
makes
think that's how
sense.
I've always felt. So I know I've always had a passion for fitness and wellness in general, and I saw a massive gap in the market. So I decided, I presented a business plan to my father, and I said, "Look, this is what I want to do, Dad. I want to go off and do this and build this new brand within this specific segment, which was directly related to why I stopped rugby, which is brain health, because I saw a massive gap in the market for that. So I saw that as that was that was the destiny that I created, and that was my path to go down, which was brain health within nutraceuticals.
Fabulous. And that before we go back into that, there's a phrase that we often like to use as opportunity in adversity. When we look at that old adage, when one door closes,
Mhm.
another door opens. It might be the end of a relationship. It leads you to your partner, to your future husband or wife, wherever it may be. But this scenario is a classic illustration of that, of looking at the controllables. You've experienced something really traumatic on so many levels that's brought your career, your passion, your whole world to an end. And then it's become the focal point for the business that you continue to run. And I'm right in assuming that you've developed this with your wife as well. It's a venture that transcends sort of personal and professional dynamics. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's the case, and we obviously we had plans of building a family, having a family together, and that was like our number one passion, and our priority was health, and we wanted to give that to the family and create a multi-generational brand out of that. So I created that with Emma.
And how long? So how long has the business been being around, because we're moving fast here, and we talk about you, as you say, it's over a decade ago, and it took some time to wrestle with that identity and to step into where you wanted to be. Another important message we hear a lot: yes, you very humbly said, I had something to fall back on within the family business, but we always see and hear the stories. Don't think you have to find the ideal fit first stab coming out of sport. It's okay to try things, to look at things, to say, this doesn't really feel like me. So you've tried different areas, and then you set this new nutritional sort of business up. What's it called? How long's it been going?
It's called Neubria. It's not a name that exists in the English dictionary, but broken up into two parts. NEU is an abbreviation for neuron, and Bria is Celtic for strength, so it's neuron strength.
Love it.
We've been going for 8 years now, so it's been a hell of a roller coaster.
Congratulations. I love it. So let's wind it back a little bit again, because there's lots of sort of narratives that are weaving together here, Jonny, in terms of do's and don'ts. We always pick the into the wisdom of former elite athletes and say our journey takes us to where we're meant to be, granted. But for the people that are coming on the path behind us, how would you sort of condense some of your advice down perhaps into one or two do's and one or two don'ts? So you're looking back on your time, certain things you would advocate doing this, certain things you would advocate don't do that. Now, I know this is particularly challenging for you in the context because you were so young. You're at 21, you were retiring. But nonetheless, I think it's appropriate, because one of the things that we always say when we're talking to small groups and individuals and wider organizations is we are not about the acceleration to the end of your sporting chapter. That's not the definition of acceleration. Where we're using acceleration is we want you to accelerate through the fear, the trepidation, to get to a point that you feel comfortable about the next chapter. Now, that next chapter might not come for several years. You might be at the start of your journey, and we wish everybody the long and distinguished career. Equally, it might be around the corner. You might be thinking, I've got one more contract in me. And in the worst case scenario, unfortunately, for people like yourself, it can come out of left field without any planning, and you're immediately stepping into that next chapter. So I think it's really powerful to access your perspectives, because a lot of the younger players particularly feel that air of invincibility that we all felt. I don't need to be thinking about the next chapter. It's miles away. I'm going to play for a decade. I'm going to play for 13 seasons. Well, in your case, at 21, you were into the next chapter. So are you able to sort of reflect on that and share a couple of do's and don'ts that you think would help other people transition successfully into the life after sport?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point and a great question. I think like you say, you feel invincible when you're younger. You're living your dream, and like with your mates, you're a hero almost. But that can be taken away so quickly with uncontrollable circumstances. I think planning is really important. It's something that I was able to get away with, but not if I didn't have what I had to fall back on, I would have been in a lot more trouble, and I would have been looking for a lot more help elsewhere. Planning and thinking long term is important. So post career, what are you passionate about? What is it apart from rugby or apart from football or anything other sport that you play? Which areas are you passionate about? What are your strengths as a human being outside of the sport? Are you a really good people's person? Are you a good networker? Are you a 9 to 5 person, or are you a person that wants to build something with a vision and you're a visionary? I think it really depends. But planning out what you would like to do, or what interests you apart from the sport that you're playing, and really put all your energy when you're away from the sport into that and building that over your career. I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's a fabulous piece of advice, because I think that it's easy for us to say it, Jonny. We'll say to people, plan, explore, everything you've just said, find out what you like, find out what you don't like. But it's the perspective that you're bringing today that I think is so hard-hitting and powerful, that you feel invincible, as you say. You're a hero with your mates. They're coming to watch you play. You're living your dream. No one expects to stop doing it at 21. And so I think that reiteration of what we say probably on a daily basis, Carl, of you need to plan is so important. So important. Anything else? So I broke your flow there, Jonny. Anything else that comes to mind when you're on the do's and don'ts?
No, I think it's don't get too carried away with things. Have humility. For me, at the time, I didn't have humility. Rugby was everything for me, and it was a big knock when it was taken away. So recognizing that it's just a sport. Yes, you're one of very, very few people in the world, or that has ever lived, that is able to play at the top level, and congratulations for that. But at the end of the day, you're quickly forgotten after your career. So you need to have the humility to recognize that, and that you need to plan for afterwards.
Yeah, great advice.
Otherwise you end up in a big, deep hole, and you end up with big mental issues if you get too carried away, I think.
Yeah, fabulous advice. And linking back, I want to just go back to the entrepreneurial journey, Jonny, because as you say, you're identifying the things you like, things you don't like, but you've got to ask questions. You've got to go out and meet people and talk to people, in our opinion. So you said yourself, I think it's a really important point just to reference. I had something. If I didn't have had that, I would have been in a far worse place. I think that's really powerful, particularly as you've said, it took a number of years to work through that, and it could have been worse. But having stepped into that entrepreneurial space, I suppose, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jonny, but there'll have been something that you were thinking, there'll have been that proverbial itch. I suppose what I'd like to hear you say, without pushing you down this route, is explore what you're passionate about. If there is that itch, go and pursue it, because we're talking to a lot of athletes that have some great ideas. They've got a seed of an idea of what they think they could do entrepreneurially, but they're sort of retracting from it because their family don't think it's a good idea, or their partner doesn't think it's a good idea, or they're worried what people will think if they try it and it goes wrong. And actually, from arm's length, we're saying, well, this sounds like a great concept. So for those budding entrepreneurs out there, how would you guide them, Jonny? I suppose where we're pushing you towards is go and explore what you're passionate about, which you've said in different guises. But I just think, you will have had this idea probably bouncing around in your head. You've gone and taken that plunge, and now you've built a great business, and you've been doing it for many years. So what are your thoughts on that specific entrepreneurial point?
Yeah, good one. I think it's always really difficult, especially if you've got a really close family and close friends that you bounce ideas off, because I think when you're getting feedback from someone, you've got to understand the motive. Usually it's with family and friends. I always use my dad as bounce back
Right.
from me, feedback for me, because I know the motive. He'll view it from my point of view because he's an entrepreneur himself.
Yes.
He's a serial entrepreneur. But it's really important that you understand the person that you're asking advice from. At the end of the day, if you really believe in something, it's about being an entrepreneur is about having the bravery to step out and do it. And man makes his plan and God laughs. Like, you can put together as many business plans as you want. It will never, ever fall out that way. It will never roll out that way, ever. It just never does. And you've got to be able to adapt to that. And I think the great thing about sport is that's what it teaches you. Resilience and being able to adapt and being reactive. You can put as much plans together as you want. And there is a certain element of fail to prepare for failure. There are certain fundamentals that you need in business. But if those fundamentals are in place, just go for it, is what I say. If it's what you're passionate about and what you believe in, then put your energy into it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, again, great advice. And Carl, we always talk about attributes, don't we? And I think Jonny's touching on a few there that I know that'll be resonating. I could see you smiling as he said them.
Well, it's just another fantastic segue, isn't it? I think, firstly, everything you're saying we are fully aligned with, and it's the sort of the crux of the majority of conversations we have with athletes is exactly what you're saying right now. It's be brave, see what's out there, particularly whilst you're still in that world of elite sport. You've got a safety net. You can be experimental. You can try things, because at the end of the day, you're going to go back to your team, your teammates, your sport, and you're going to still be competing in this safety net. And you've hit upon some few key points: strengths, being able to network, resilience. What would you say are some of those key attributes that got you to be an elite rugby player? You were an elite sportsman. Like you said, it's very few people in the world get to that level of sport. But what would you say were some of those key attributes that you've translated over into your journey as a chief exec and your journey as an entrepreneur that's helped you progress, continue, grow, and become better?
Yeah, I think the number one is being competitive. That is the number one thing for me. I'm really, really competitive, and I had it when I was playing rugby. I always wanted to win, and I never ever wanted to miss a tackle. If I miss it, I was very hard on myself, and I still have that to a certain level. I think having resilience. So, I got injured a lot in rugby, and that really taught me resilience, because it's the worst thing as a rugby player or a football player to get injured, because you're not building your brand. If I've converted to
Yeah.
business sort of terms, your brand is you and how you play and how well you play, and how much value you build. And if you're injured, you're out of it, and you can't build value. And in fact, your value goes down, because you then get known as being injury prone. So it's very like mental. Having the mental resilience is important, I think, as well as the physical resilience within the sport. So yeah, I'd say that those two are the main things for me. But
I think the great attributes, Johnny, and it's lovely to hear you suggesting them again. This is the beauty of the podcast, that you're bringing this wisdom to the fore for us, because a lot of the confidence and lack of confidence, rather, that we encounter with athletes is what do I bring? What will I bring when I'm no longer a professional cricketer or footballer or rugby player or whatever discipline we're talking to? And actually, you've hit a few. Well, you've got a phenomenal level of resilience. It comes from injuries, as you've alluded to there, Johnny, very articulately. It also comes from the brutality of playing live sport in front of audiences, in front of live audiences, digital audiences, having reporters, opinions flying everywhere, particularly now with social media. And when you have a bit of a shocker, being able to pick yourself up and go again. So the resilience is there. I think you've talked a few times about courage. It takes courage to step into those arenas in the first place. It takes courage to operate in a contact sport. You're always going to come up against people bigger, tougher, faster, more aggressive. So there's a big mental step you've already taken to have courage, which serves you well going into industry. Competitive natures. We do a lot in the medical sales sector, and it's tailor-made for competitive, self-driven individuals. You need that, and you've got it in sport. So I think when we hear ex-athletes like yourself who have been very successful in business relate it back to certain attributes, it's fabulous to hear, because anybody listening who's preparing for those next steps thinks, well, yeah, I'm pretty competitive. I've got some resilience. And then they start thinking about, well, I've been quite courageous to get to this point. And it sort of emboldens them to just reflect on what they've got. Yes, keep building on it, but don't discount those traits that have made them successful in the first place. So I think, Johnny, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I think there's all manner of pockets of wisdom that you've shared. Is there anything else that you think we need to cover? Anything else that you wanted to contribute when you reflect on your journey, or do you think we've wrung you dry and extracted all the wisdom that we can?
No, it's been a great chat. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for asking me to come on. I'm sure there'll be a load of things when we come off this, and I'll think, oh, I should have said this, should have said that, but it's all in the moment, isn't it? So
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome. And the final question for people that have listened and they're interested in terms of what you're building and the brain health and the supplementation, etc. Where's the best place for people to find you and to be able to access information about the product line that you have built to help people with their brain health?
Yeah, the best place would be to go to your local Holland and Barrett. We're in all the Holland and Barretts nationwide, and we've got about 20 different products within Holland and Barrett. So we're building. We're still very early in our sort of development stage, but something that's really important to it is quality of products, and we formulate all of our own products in house, which you'd be surprised some of the cowboys out there that don't do that. And then to an ultra high standard, and to look after our most important organ, which is the brain, of course.
Fabulous. Well, that's great. And everybody knows where to find you now. So we wish you the very best of luck with that and that business. And again, we thank you sincerely for taking the time to join us on the 88 podcast today, Johnny.
Thank you
Cheers,
so
Jonny.
much, James. Thank you, Carl.
Thanks for joining us this week on our ATA podcast. If you found this conversation insightful and it resonates with your journey, please subscribe, follow the show, and stay connected with us for more insights, resources, and information on how we at ATA are supporting your preparation for life beyond the game.